Very good. Wow. She's making. We are set finally. Are you all set, Jiwon? Okay, great. Just swipe your bio. Oh, I figured that's what it was. Oh, yeah. I'm glad that it's, Good afternoon, everybody.
Hi.
It's so good to see you here. Welcome to our second Writers Project of the semester. And a special welcome to Jiwon Choi, editor at Hanging Loose Press and poet, and outstanding human being here to talk to us about editing and share some of her poetry and answer your questions today. My name's Kathy McCoy. I direct the Writers Project. We'd like to invite you to take some, take some refreshments at any point. You can sneak around and grab some food or water. Jiwon has also, she can tell you about what she's left in the back, a copy of a Hanging Loose periodical publication for you to check out. I'd like to thank the Faculty Student Association of SUNY Adirondack for providing refreshments and the college for sponsoring the Writers Project. Jiwon Choi is the author of 2 poetry collections. One Daughter is Worth 10 Sons. I love that title. And as well as the next one, I Used to Be a Korean, which both deal with her identity as a Korean in the diaspora. She's an early childhood educator at the Educational Alliance, where she works with teachers and on developing emergent curriculum. She's a longtime gardener and coordinator at the Pacific Street Brooklyn Bears Garden near downtown Brooklyn. I've got to check that out.
On down anytime.
Where she collaborates with local organizations to bring workshops and cultural and arts events and music events into the garden. She started her garden's first poetry series called Hanging Loose Outpost. Poets Read in the Garden. Oh, that's awesome too. She's really great with titles. So my students that are having issues with titles, talk to Jiwon. To support local emerging writers and poets with live events in a safe and supportive outdoor space. Her work can be found in some well-known publications like Painted Bride Quarterly, Bombay Gin Literary Journal, Rigorous, and Hanging Loose Magazine. And she comes here all the way from Brooklyn, so give her a round of applause, please.
Thank you, Kathy, for inviting me. It's really beautiful up here. We've gone as far as the Catskills, and I've been to Lake George, but it's been a while. But this is definitely true north, and in many instances for me, because we're such city rats in many ways.
I married one of those.
You married a city rat. I mean, we're more flexible than people think we can be. You just have to learn a new skill set. But it's really beautiful country up here. And we were just talking about how clean the air is. Like we can notice right away just the quality of air is that much brighter and just cleaner. So I we'll talk a little bit about Hanging Loose Press. We are a small independent press started by Bob Hirshon, Dick Lurie, Mark Pavlock, and Emmett Jarrett back in 1966. I am a relatively new editor. It took them about like 5 decades to get a female editor on board, but change is slow, but change is inevitable, as we all know. I will just talk a little bit about Hanging Loose. Bob Hirshon, my editor and publisher, passed away in March 2021. And he was in many ways my poetry father, my mentor. I was found in the slush pile because Hanging Loose still accepts manuscripts by mail. We don't have an online presence. You cannot email us work unless we invite you to, but we will always read anything you mail to us via the US Post. So please go look at our submission guidelines and please submit your work. We have a dedicated high school section. Every issue has space for young high school writers, which is wonderful. Sometimes I think the high school writing is a little bit better than the grown-up writing, but you didn't hear that from me. It's just a matter of taste. So Hanging Loose started in Brooklyn. They basically mimeographed the magazine. Everything was loose pages. Eventually, they were asked to bind the pages because it was too hard to send out. And bookstores are not going to want to, like shuffle pages of magazine, of a magazine. So we have been publishing the magazine for 57 years. And we've also been a stalwart advocate for writers that are who we understand to be underrepresented in the publishing landscape. If you look at the landscape now, you will find it hasn't really shifted that much in 2023. The landscape. It is 76% predominantly white editors and publishers. I looked it up that I'm in the 5% percentile of Asian editors. And this was just a small swath of information that Lee and Low gathered back in 2019. 2016, and then they revised it in 2019. You can look it up. It's Lee and Low, the children's book publisher, who also tries to really, represent with really good children's books. So Hanging Loose has also published a lot of first books. Sherman Alexi's first book of poetry, Kathy Park Hong, You Look This. So we definitely have a really good track record. But I think the track record can always be better. So I guess when I joined, and I haven't been an editor for very long, probably less, I think it's been less than a year that I've been actively in the role. So I'm very new, but despite being new, I can see that we have to sort of make a decision. What kind of a small independent press will we be? Will we sort of stand by and let the status quo be the status quo, or will we actually be advocates and stewards of writers and basically just people's stories, basically your stories? That's basically all that we're doing, is that we're gathering, and it's an ancient and wonderful tradition of gathering each other's words and stories so that we can build and create a community. Because that's basically what we writers are, right? We are a community. Sometimes we don't like everyone in the community, but it is still a community, and we have to learn how to make the tent bigger. And if you disagree, it doesn't have to be like an end game, right? It's okay to not agree with each other, but we do have to decide how will we get along with each other. And art, obviously, as you know, Kathy, art is really truly the way that humans can come together. Looking at this beautiful exhibit, I mean, this is just really just phenomenal. And just a representation of how important it is to tell our stories, whether it's visually, whether it's through words, or through oral tradition. So I guess even though I'm a newbie, I do feel like I have taken it upon myself to make sure that Hanging Loose doesn't just talk about diversity, you know, because you can talk a lot about diversity. As Marlon James, who is a wonderful writer, talks about, discussing diversity is not actually doing anything constructive about diversity, right? If you actually want diversity, you have to create it, right? You have to make it. So I've taken it upon myself to really ask the questions, what are we doing as an independent small press? We don't have a lot of money. We're not that well connected. We don't have a board of directors who can fund us. We have to do all of that ourselves. We have to fundraise. We have to make sure we're getting the books out there. But I guess if you let things stop you, you will stop, right? So I think the point is, even though you are a small independent press, you still have a responsibility to other writers, to each other. We have a responsibility to really rework the publishing landscape. And I am just one example of what that means, right? I send my work in, someone reads it at the press, and then they ask me to send in a manuscript, right? I mean, not everything is as easy as that, but maybe things don't have to be such a hurdle either, right? So I think what we want to do is to be a press that really, in the age of this hyper social media, really is trying to figure out what are the stories that still matter to each other, right? I know there's a lot of talk about TikTok this, and we have a TikTok account, right? It started because we had an intern last summer who was really good at that. So the TikTok account is there, but none of us are really like doing anything with it. But part of it is we want to at least we want to be at the table and having these conversations like, oh, well, TikTok can be good. Social media can be good, but how will we as an independent press still be viable and tell the stories that need to be told? And I don't necessarily have an answer for that right now. I think we're still kind of figuring out, are we still going to publish the same writers that we publish? Are we going to really, stick our necks out a little bit more and really get more new writers into the mix? Maybe it's a combination of both. But I guess for me, my focus is to really get the stories out there, right? To really share who we are as people, our family stories, our cultural stories, all of those things, I think, is what we want to do, and we want to be known for as being a press that really thinks about underrepresented, and that could really mean anything and everything, right? It could be your economic situation, it could be your ethnicity, whatever it is. We just want to be known as a press that really that listens to people and brings people together. So that's a little bit of my shtick about the press. I did want to read a little bit of work by Bob Hirshon, and then I'll read a little bit of my work. And then if there are any specific questions or comments, I would love to have a dialogue versus me, just standing here and, talking at you, which I could do for a long time, but I don't, it's not as interesting what is more interesting, I think, is having sort of an ongoing conversation with each other. And that's really what poetry is, right? If you find a writer or a poet that you really like, you're having a conversation with that person, right? There's a flow. It may not seem like it, but it is a flow of ideas because you're connecting to the ideas and the work. And hopefully you're also creating your own work, whatever genre that may be. So End of the Business Day is the last book that Bob Hirshon wrote before he passed away. And a lot of it are city poems. And he was very humorous in the way that he wrote about the world. Poignant, but very kind of, I don't want to say snarky in a bad sense, but he was definitely he could be very critical, but in a good humored way. So I'm going to read one of the poems here that I particularly love, a little tongue-in-cheek, The Real New Yorkers. The Real New Yorkers. Did you get vomit on your shoes? No, I think it's pizza. Looks more like vomit. Yesterday, one whole bench was smeared with shit. People rushed into the car and smiled when they saw all the empty seats. Then they saw there was shit all over them. Some people got very angry, and others looked embarrassed and giggled. The real New Yorkers found places that weren't too shitty and put down newspapers and sat on them. It was the same thing at each stop. People rushing happily to the empty seats and then seeing shit all over the place. Okay, I got this crap off my shoe. Let's go. I thought it was pizza. Yeah, pizza. I don't know, some kind of crap. It is very tongue-in-cheek, but when I keep reading it, I really find there's a sense of sort of understanding your situation, right? Understanding the situation and trying to make the best of it, right? And of course, I don't know if this really happened to Bob, but yes, there is a lot of crap on the subway on the subway trains. So that's one poem that I keep going back to because there's a sense of humor in it, but there's also, I think, just a sense of resilience about his work and his perspective on life. Till the very day that he died, he was very optimistic and hopeful. And that's really what poetry is and art, right? It's us being optimistic and hopeful and wanting to advocate for each other. Let's see, the other one that I'm going to read because we are going to the AWP, which is a big deal if you're a press. It's the Association of Writers and Publishers, and it's taking place in Seattle this year. And it's a big deal. You know, people, I mean, it's not for the big commercial presses. This is really for the small independent presses. But there's a lot of money that people pay to go to it. Bob didn't really think that much of it. But this year we're going to have a table at AWP. He's probably turning around this way. But this is his homage to AWP. Après AWP. Class, I would say, if I had a class. Don't bother to find a seat. This is a very low residency MFA program, and you will never see me again. You will write your villanelles and flash fictions and mail them to a post office box in Wyoming, where they will be eaten by police dogs. This is the most efficient way to demonstrate the likelihood of a brilliant literary future. I myself will be leaving the program here at the Secaucus Institute of Dental Hygiene to start a new no residency program at the Harvard School of Air Conditioning Repair. Got some cool new ideas on how to teach writing where the words just stack up in the brain. Awaiting advances in ESP. By the way, are any of you interested in a really nice fake Rolex? I mean, all in good humor, right? We understand that we have to go through some of the rigmarole of trying to be respectable in an industry that wants you to really kowtow, right, to the big dogs. But as a small independent press, again, I feel like we have a choice. We don't have to always do what everyone else is doing, or you know, we don't have to. As he liked to say, you know, no one tells us what to do, right? Because no one is giving us any money. We're not beholden to anyone. So we really decide how we will sort of raise the path to the future. Does anyone have any comments or questions before I read a little bit of my work? You know, it's okay if you don't have any questions.
What is the name of the poet that you just read?
Oh, his name is Robert Hirshon.
Robert?
Yeah, Robert Hirshon. It's Hershon, and he was one of the 4 main editors of Hanging Loose Press and publishers. He passed away. Yeah, almost 2 years ago. He passed away.
Robert
Hirshon, Hersho, or Bob. I mean, we just all call it Bob. So when he passed away, a lot of the institutional memory went with him because he really did a lot for the press. So we are trying now just to rebuild and keep the press going in his honor, but also to really make a difference in the landscape of poetry and publishing, which for many, many years has been very exclusionary. So I think that we as a community of poets and small presses and writers, I think we can really shape and remake the landscape so that it's a little bit more, for lack of a better word, equitable, right? But again, I think presses have to really ask themselves, you know, certain questions. And I feel like we're also not asking all the right questions yet, but we're getting there slowly and surely. So my work it has a lot to do with identity, and I think a lot of the reasons why the press really resonates with me, Hanging Loose Press, is because they do publish a lot of books by people who are also trying to figure out, you know, the meaning of life. I mean, we all are trying to figure out the meaning of life, but we're all doing it in a, you know, different way in our different genres in art. But I think the fact that Hanging Loose really understood what I was trying to do really made me see that I did have a community, right? I was a part of something bigger than myself. And that's ultimately, I think, what we all, maybe we don't all realize it sometimes, but I kind of think that people really need that. We need to know that we are a part of something that's bigger than ourselves. So I'm going to read some work from my second book, I Used to Be Korean. And a lot of the poems are about my family, which I think a lot of us write about our families, just because we can't really help it. This one is in particular dedicated to my mother. You live in the space behind your eyes. Look at this universe you've built for old school friends and your favorite Shakespeare teacher. Your father smelling of tobacco and beer is here too, and the cousin who died in childbirth. You picnic here, forage wild greens, gather fallen chestnuts, and bite into all the persimmons, never minding the juice running down your chin. So what I have always known is true. You were a mother made up entirely of memories. Sorrowful membrane, combative DNA, regretful ribosomes. And the truth of it, at a quarter tilt, is that your primordial bacteria structure is coming undone to be swallowed by your bleak house of loose nails and sagging walls. So I'm also working on a third collection of books, a third collection of poems, but it's going rather slowly just because I'm also a preschool teacher and I also do a lot of urban gardening. So there's no really, well, I won't say there isn't money in writing. There is money in writing, you know, for certain, I think, genres, but I think poetry is a genre that is, I mean, you really have to believe in it and you really have to love it. So I don't think there's money in poetry yet, but maybe there will be, we'll see. But it doesn't stop me from writing and trying to really get, you know, my perspective out into the world, which I also encourage you to do, is to get your perspective out into the world. And it looks like you've come to a really good place to do that. This feels like a really beautiful space in the world. So I will read just a few poems from my new, well, it's not really a collection yet, but just new work. And then if there are any other comments or questions, I would love to hear from you. This is dedicated to Louise Bogan, a poet that I really love. I found one of her collections in the college library, in the library of my college. And so I really am fascinated with her work, but also her story. She had a very dark childhood, but she really had the singular craft for language and for the music of language. So this is dedicated to her. The birthday the gods bequeath us. Your mother taking you through dim hallways that lead to hotel beds and random men. By 4 years old, this was your Wednesday schedule. You wouldn't always remember the wallpaper, but the fisted hand on a pillow is probably what blinded you for 2 days. Well, as far as Epiphany goes, at least you now know the gods made you out of glass, but you will not shatter, just become full of cracks. And I don't think she really actualized herself as a poet. I mean, as a known poet. I feel like she was, you know, she wrote a lot, but I feel like there's really not enough of an understanding of what a fine writer and artist she was. But I think the one thing about being a writer or an artist is that you get to sort of maybe rewrite the story a little bit, you know, tweak it, give your heroes or the people that you admire sort of a second life, as it were. And then I'm going to read this one. If Aretha Franklin talked about being interested in a man, it could have been during an interview when a reporter brought up the topic of men. But what could she say really, this being national TV and all? So she recounted the time she saw Charlie Mingus slap a piano player across the head to get his attention. An allegory, or how they did it in the olden days? But who said she was looking? Plan Queen Bee coming up. Muster your best Rogers and Hart and conjure the maiden's prayer. Glad to be unhappy, alone, and at sea, a ship without a sail, knowing her heart was full, but her arms were too short to box with God, and no one in TV land blinked. I think Charlie Mingus did really slap a lot of people across the head. So I think part of that might be true. So for time, should I,
Oh,
how are you?
I'm transfixed here. It's 1:10. We've got a half hour at least.
Okay, does anyone want to have a comment or just maybe talk about their own sort of experience with writing?
We should have plenty of questions for you. So time to pull out those questions, guys.
What's your name?
My name is Jordan. My question is, in the poem that you read that was said with your mother, what did you mean by, I'm sure it was a metaphor maybe or something, by the snails gathering walls?
Right. I mean, I think that's exactly what they are, right? I mean, all of these images that we create to tell our story, definitely metaphors. Just the sense of things coming undone. I mean, I guess also people, you might have an imagery that pops up in your head depending on what your genre is. So for me, the idea of just nails sticking out of like the walls was a big, for me, a big image when I was writing that piece about my mother. But I kind of think that I know I was reading, there's a great essay book by Carl Phillips called Mystery is My Trade. And he mentions how some writers or some poets are very anti-metaphor, or they don't really think that simile is an equitable way of using language. But of course, I don't know where we would be without metaphor in poetry. It'd be like, it would be you're painting, you know, maybe with your elbow, right? Like, or you need that sort of an understanding of maybe it's a little subterfuge, but you need a little bit of a metaphor to sort of give you a little bit of a sort of a space or a buffer, right, between you and what you're trying to say and what you're feeling. Yes.
I write stem things mostly.
What's your name?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And when I find something.
Yeah, I mean, I really think that it's important for the artist yourself to ask yourself what the point is, right? You have to ask yourself why you do the art that you do, whether it's painting or filmmaking. And maybe you don't know the answer right away, right? Maybe you work towards an answer, but I think you have to figure out what is it that's important to you about that particular the work that you do. I mean, I guess if you do things for money, you know, which we have to do, right? But I think I mean, I love being a preschool teacher, so I like it. So I'm glad to be in that profession, and to get paid for it, not do it for free. But so I think that, yes, there's a way for you to fashion your life to do things that pay you, but that you believe in it. You know, you believe in the work that you do. And maybe it's a combination of working for an organization, but also doing your own art. But these questions are good for me also to think about. I feel like, you know, because I feel like I don't really ask myself a lot of personal questions. And I make statements to myself, but I think it's different when you can talk to other people and ask yourself or think about these questions that wouldn't occur to you if you're just, you know, by yourself. Yes.
You find it difficult to write about the family knowing might see it, like, if that makes sense, like talking about the issues you've had in the past.
What's your name? Finley. Yeah, I mean, my mom passed away 2 years ago. Although my first book did come out, but I didn't show her any of my work. But she also had early onset dementia, so I don't know that it would have really, you know, made any sense to her. I think you're not doing it to hurt anyone, right? You're not doing your art to be vengeful or, you know, to hurt anyone. You're doing it because it's a part of your process, and it's a part of who you are and how you want to live your life. So I think if you're honest, but you're honest in not a spiteful way, I don't know that people should stop themselves, you know, from creating the work that they need to create. Because ultimately you can't really control that anyway. You can't really stop that, right? But we're not writing work to hurt other people. We're writing work to really share and build a community together. Yes. What's your name?
So my name is Laura.
Laura.
So how did you become a poet?
Well, years ago, I think it might have been the 6th grade or maybe a little bit before. There was a teaching artist that came into our public school. I think his name was Woody King. I still can see his face, but I wish I had like written down his name somewhere, but I think that was his name. And he would bring books to our class, books of poetry, and then just hand them out to the students. And I also had a teacher who encouraged us to write poetry, or just to write. So I think a lot of it is to have adults in your life, if you're a young person that believes that your voice and that your perspective is of value, and then to help you figure out how to do that, whether it's poetry or fiction, whatever it is. I think that's a huge part of why I love poetry, is because I had a grown-up take time to be interested in what I was thinking and feeling, and also to show us these like really wonderful poetry books.
You mentioned reading a lot of the works from high school writers. I'm just wondering if you've noticed a difference in what younger writers are writing about, or if they have a different style than what you previously.
Young writers are very they're very sophisticated. You know, you wouldn't, because when I was writing in high school, it was really bad, because I still have some of it. And I remember like thinking, and you know, like everyone's like, this is great. It's like, that wasn't great, but you can't tell anyone it's not great, right? You still have to encourage them, which, you know, they did. But really the caliber of writing that we see from young writers is it's really astonishing, but I think it's reflective of the experiences that they're living through. I think young people live through a lot of hard and complicated experiences, and so it comes out, you know, in their work. But I think we're all writing about the same thing, you know, pain, family, and then hopefully trying to get through it. What's your name? Michael. Yes.
Sorry,
Finley.
I have a question. So when you're writing, does it just come at random times that you would sit down and like take time to write? Because as someone with ADHD, it kind of just comes back instead of sitting down. How was your process on that?
I think it's probably both. I mean, sometimes I'll be maybe on the train, you know, trying not to sit on the shit. You know, so I'll take out my phone or whatever. If I have a little notepad, I'll just write something down. You know, if I'm, you know, waiting online to pay for something, post office, usually it takes a long time. You know, it'll just come to you. I think sometimes people have this image of writers like sitting like in front of a beautiful window and, you know, looking at the birds and the trees. I mean, which you can do up here, but in Brooklyn, you know, not so much where we are. But I think that the way you write is the way you write, right? And there's really no one way of doing it. So sometimes I get frustrated because I will sit down and try, but if nothing is coming, nothing is coming, right? You can't force it. I mean, you can, but it's different, right? The product is a little bit different, and maybe that's okay. But I think you have to have the option, right, of being the writer that makes sense for you, right? You can't let people tell you how to write. You have to figure that out for yourself. And that's really with anything, right? That's with our life in general. I mean, it's good to have guidance. I'm not saying like it's great to have a mentor and someone that advocates for you, but I think ultimately you have to be the one that decides, you know, how you will be the artist. Yes.
Yeah, so now that we're talking about process, at the moment, picking up the development process, the development process is always on the development process, like how do you describe it?
Well, so because we still get everything by mail, I will read everything that comes in. And then of course because there's five editors. So each editor will ask, you know, like if they meet a writer that they like, they'll ask that writer to email them something. But really mostly like 80% of what we get is still through the mail. So I'm basically just reading everything that comes in, and then, you know, we just talk about if there's something that makes sense for us, we will talk about it. Because again, you have to think about if you're writing and you're sending your work out, which is something that people find important, but not everyone, you know, finds that important. But if you are a writer who's sending out your work, you want to make sure that the organization that you're sending it to is aligned to you believe in that organization, right? And so it's not a waste of your time to send your work. Sometimes we get like romance novels, or, you know, someone has not really done the research and they send us like science fiction, right? Like we cannot, you know, that's not who we are. But I think for us, the process is to get the work, to read it, and then to talk about why it might be a good, you know, piece for the magazine, or why the poet might, you know, why we might want to talk to the poet about, you know, a manuscript, that, you know, that kind of thing. So the process is for us still very ground level. We just read everything we get, and then we talk about what work makes sense for the press.
And just to be clear, you're talking about both a lit mag and the published books there.
We do publish books. The book piece, a lot of it is because we don't accept just manuscripts blind, but if there's a writer that feels very in sync with the press, we might contact that person and ask for, you know, for more work. Yes.
So a long time ago, Hanging Loose had the policy, they never published a book by someone who hadn't been the magazine first. And I'm curious if that's a policy the new editors are carrying forward and what the challenges are to diversification if you've got that structure.
What's your name?
Nancy.
Nancy. Did you, was it written somewhere or were you in conversation with someone?
Bob said,
Yeah,
was
I
a
mean,
conversation with Bob.
I think that is still true for a lot of the editors. I think it just depends, really, but again, there's 5 editors, so, I'm just like one voice out of 5. We did start something called the Founders Prize this year, which is, for someone's first book. Even if you haven't been in the magazine, we'll publish your book and give you $1,000. And I think we'll do that for the next, 4 years or so, because we have got funding for it. So I think there will always be cases where we don't always follow the rule. I mean, I think it's a good process, to have writers in the magazine and then go from there. But I don't know that if it always has to be that way. So that just is a reflection of maybe having to change and shift a little bit, right? And disrupt the familiar, as it were. But again, everything is a conversation because there's not just me, right? If it were me, things would get done a lot faster. But that's not necessarily a good thing, it's just that I have to understand how to work, with 4 other people and perspectives.
Editor, when you're reviewing pieces, how do you separate with your own personal biases so that you can review a piece of
What's your name?
Elizabeth?
Elizabeth. That's a really good question. And that's probably the hardest thing. That's probably the hardest thing is to be able to parse work that may be good, but that you don't like. Because, those 2 things can be true at the same time, right? It could be good, but I don't like it. In that case, I would just send it on and say, let's talk about this, because maybe someone else will like it, right? And then it's a conversation, which is okay. Because if I only accepted work that I liked, the magazine would be like, oh, it's, the same 5 people or whatever, right? So I think, and that's an ongoing learning process for me. And hopefully I'll get a lot better at it. But I think I can I know if something is not specifically, if that person has no sense of where they're sending stuff to, that's always very clear. It's like they closed their eyes and they threw it, a dart, and then it landed on our name. But I think it's always clear when someone hasn't done any research and just sends, stuff in. But yeah, I mean, I do think about that a lot, like, is it good just because I like it, or is it bad because I don't? I mean, those are like really good questions to always, asking yourself. Yes, ma'am.
I have another one. You sort of alluded in the beginning to the sort of joy of getting published and the validation and the joining of this community of the authors and the editors. And but as you know, it'll be a long road to get to that point. Looking back, what are some of the ways to form community before you get to the point of book publication and joining a press? Or are there things you wish you'd done to start building and sustaining community in the earlier phases of a career?
Right. I mean, I think it is really fun to be published. And to have your book acknowledged by a community that you respect, right? I mean, and I think that's true just for as humans, right? Whether it's in our profession or in our art. I do recommend just being with other writers, and you could form your own workshop, right? I mean, I've done that a few times. I've also gone to to workshops, but I think there's a way to be in in a community, right, of writers, not necessarily all like-minded, but just in a community of writers that also appreciate the importance of sharing stories and writing. Because I think if the only thing you care about is being, published, that's not going to be as, in my opinion, it's not going to be as rewarding as if you can be in communication with your beloved community, right? And then you get to actually maybe be a part of building that community. But again, I think people have to ask themselves why they create the work that they create. Is it just to have the acknowledgement, or is it something a little bit more meaningful, right? And there's I'm not alluding that there's a right answer. It's just your answer, your understanding of why you create the work that you create.
Could you talk a little bit about the value of revising and rewriting in your own work, and also the value of that for people who actually submit a work?
Right. Yeah, I think you want to respect the reader, right? I want to be respectful of your time, right? And your energy of reading my work. So I'm going to edit, as much as I can, to really get to the point of what I'm trying to share. I think it's okay to show other people your work before you send it, to a magazine. Or it's okay maybe to put something down and look at it a few weeks later, just to get a fresh sense of what you've written. But I think it's important to really value the person who may be reading your work. And you respect them by putting out the best work that you can put out. And editing is I think, a huge piece of that process. But a little frantic, because there's a sense that you can over edit, but that's still better than not editing.
But I know you sometimes see submissions where it's just clear the person has not taken the time to really look closely at what they're sending you.
Right. And I think
Or it
that's
appears
just
that way.
Right, it feels that way. But I think that's also maybe a reflection of where they are in their writing. Right. So what I'm writing this year might look different, because hopefully it will have evolved even a year from now. But even if you feel that you're a new writer, I still think that the process of editing is very beneficial. And if you're not sure that you can do it by yourself, then you could get, some help. I did want to just say that I did bring some copies of Hanging News 109. We are going to be coming out with a collaboration with this artist. This is Elizabeth Hirshon. She's a watercolor color and a painter. We're going to be doing a combined art and poetry chapbook of Bob Hirshon's work and Lizzie's paintings. Lizzie is Bob's daughter. So they were working on it before he passed, but we're still trying to get it out, hopefully this year. So I just brought this issue so you could see her beautiful work. And there's some, you know, really good poets in here as well. So there are some just copies in the back of that table.
I was going to ask, I don't want to put you on the spot, but if you know the VITA or VITA statistics, you mentioned that you're in the top 5% for, you know, Asian American women to be an editor and just for Asian people. And I'm just wondering how, you know, what the percentages are now for anybody class generally as a minority just to get published.
I think the overall, this was more a survey for people in the profession. But I think I think that if 76% of the publication personnel, publishing personnel, at the executive level and at even the intern level is predominantly, let's say, white, I kind of feel like that will affect the product that we get, right? And it's not to say that you can't be a white editor and really have a sense of, you know, what it means to have a diversified like publication or like you know, like a landscape that's diverse. But I think that the point of the survey was just to say that maybe it would be a little bit more diverse if the actual people publishing, right, and making those really big decisions about what gets out there, like in the Barnes and Noble and, you know, whatever in the bookstores, like if that percentage is a little bit higher, you know, for Asians and for African Americans and for Native Americans, it's very in the very single like digits. So, but that doesn't mean that 5 years from now, you know, the rate won't, you know, go up. Or it might go down. Who knows? You know,
It's enlarging, right?
Right.
Overall.
but slowly.
Yeah.
It is enlarging, but it's slow. But again, I think it's because you know, what questions are we asking ourselves about that, you know, or maybe not everyone cares about it. You know, I mean, I can't make like HarperCollins care about, you know, about these things. I can only sort of think about what we can do as a small independent press. Like how will we, along with other small presses, rework the landscape a little bit, you know? But we just want to bring good work to the people, you know, and that across the board can come from anybody and everybody, right? That's our point, is that good work can come from everybody. And so we want to be a part of that, you know, that process.
Some more questions?
So since you're a preschool teacher, my mom is also how to incorporate your love of literature and writing into your everyday class, because you know, obviously younger, the developmental status isn't up to where you're typically writing. So I guess my question, what kind of literature do you like in your classroom? And have you ever considered maybe writing children's poetry or children's novels?
It's really hard to write a good children's book. Like people think it's really easy, but no, I mean, look at Sendak and, you know, like Keats, Ezra Jack Keats, like those, like brilliant, but so hard to do. I think what I do is I try to obviously respect the kids by bringing in books that are really emotionally helpful to them. A lot of books for kids, I think, have to talk about feelings and self-worth, and also making sure that the media that comes into the school really reflects the families and the children that go to the school. So it has to be reflective of the world, right? It can't just be like one image, but it has to be authentic and truthful. So I think you, as a preschool teacher, you just try to always bring in media materials that are very respectful. There are a lot of books out there that are very just dismissive of young children, and you don't want to, bring that into your school. It's just, I guess, being aware, right? Because like a 3-year-old is very already who they are. They're already who they will be. But you can support like the further growth of strong self of identity by bringing in materials that are that speak to like how beautiful they are and how smart and wonderful, because children are really just wonderful, even when they're not wonderful. 'Cause I work with 4-year-olds, so that's my favorite. That's my favorite age.
That's the why, right?
Yes, yeah. Well, it's the year that they are not really afraid of you or anything. They're very open, and they're compassionate, and they're very generous, and that's really what you want to help them maintain, right? They're honest, they don't care that you're uncomfortable if they say something, because they're just trying to figure out like what's happening in the world around them. And it's like poetry, right? It's very much like poetry. Yeah, I mean, but you can't take any of it personally, really. You just have to understand that it's part of the process, right? So. Oh, I did bring my card. So if you would like to send in any work, please go online, and if you are a poet, submit some poetry. You'll see all the information on the website, because we're always reading. We read, year-round work.
Bring this to one more power?
Sure. I'll do this one because I had a friend in, I want to say it was when we were 11 or 12. I'm not sure, but we used to always make cinnamon toast. So this is called cinnamon toast. Buttering those thin slices to the brink of destruction, bedazzling with sugar and cinnamon, shellacking fingers and teeth, our lubricated lips, kissing in your white kitchen before your mother gets home, while our grammar homework gets cold. I think we used like margarine. I don't even think it was real butter, but I just remember like the bread would break because we would just put so much. It's kind of disgusting.
Well, thank you very much.
With you, and enjoy the really great work in there. And if you would like a business card, I'll give you my business card, because I just had to print it this year. I need to actually give them out and not just, keep them in my backpack for the next 20 years.
Thank you so much, Jiwon. It was awesome. And folks, please help yourselves to what's in the back here. Take a look at the Hanging Loose magazine. And I want to remind you that the next Writers Project event is a month from today, where we have Tara Stillions Whitehead coming from Pennsylvania to see us. So thank you.
Thank you for the response.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. I got it. Turn the thing on.
Okay.
Right back here.
Right. Yeah, exactly.